Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are here to talk about interconnection security and primarily about API security in this modern world. My name is Adam John. I have been around CMS for about 12 years now, IT security for 20, and I have been involved with 3Zone, with the ACA, with CMMC, and now I'm back to ACA. Can never get away from it. Anusha?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, I am Anusha Iyer. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Corsha. It's an emerging cybersecurity startup in the Tysons area, and we are very focused on API security and helping enterprises kind of protect their machine-to-machine connections. Prior to Corsha, I've been in the cybersecurity space for nearly 20 years now. Started off in the DC area at the Naval Research Lab on a couple of different programs, and then spent a stint managing DARPA programs in the areas of privacy, security, mission planning, and excited to be here today.
Oh, thank you. Just for you to know, we will be available after this video presentation at our virtual booth. So if any questions, please feel free to join us. So the past several years, decade plus, there's been a focus on the end user, on the endpoint, right? And with reason. That whole cartoon where we have all these technologies, and in this corner is Dave, because Dave doesn't get it, or is trying to do Dave's job and let out half the D base to another country. It's not a true story, but it's the fear we all have, right? So there's been a lot of resources and money thrown into EDR, DLP, inventorying what's on the systems, knowing much more, having much more insight. I mean, the 90s, no one cared if you patched an endpoint. Now, if that's one of the first things you patch now, right?
Right.
But also you got to know who that person is. There's ID federation, so we have a central idea of who's who, but also with obviously multi-factor. How many times have passwords gotten out? Well, the passwords are out, but they don't have my token, right? They don't have my push to text. So it's a lot harder to get into systems without this second factor.
Yeah, definitely a lot of focus on just endpoint protection and users, the whole bit.
Yeah, and it, there's other protections to email, DLP and email, USB lockdowns, using HTTPS everywhere, that kind of work. But what has not happened, right, is there's no focus on the interconnection of, the different systems. CMS has a lot of systems in various data centers and various clouds, and, that security is kind of taken for granted. So, like I said, CMS is a hybrid cloud environment. We all live in this, right? We used to be just the BDC and the EDCs in Tulsa and down in South Carolina, even in Denver. And now we have AWS, we have Salesforce, we have Azure. We have these multiple environments, and they all interconnect through VPNs, but they also interconnect through each other through the internet. We talk to other agencies, we talk to other groups, right? These systems and technologies, they need to send data, and the amount of data that's going around is fairly staggering. So, what are these connections, right? We use APIs, we use SFTP, we use other connections, right? And we're talking between data centers, we're talking to the public cloud and AWS, we're talking to private clouds, we're talking to other companies, we're talking to hospitals, doctor's office, how do they get paid? We're talking to CMSNet, right? CMSNet is several hundred connections to different companies that are bypassing certain security that we have because we trust them, right? Mm-hmm. They're, it's not carte blanche, but you need to think about those interconnections.
Yeah, it's really kind of pushing the boundaries of what an enterprise perimeter is, right? There is no perimeter. It's really open architectures.
Correct. And and every day, like I said before, we push a ton of data back and forth. So the chart behind me, it's not meant to belittle or to laugh and at anybody, because there is a CMS line up there. But it's really to focus on APIs are becoming the de facto connection method, right? SFTP is out there. We still use it a lot, but we're not in, the old days anymore, right? We're not in the old types of connections anymore. We're not hardwiring connections anymore, back in my day. So, as you say, CMS is up there, but it's not the shame or belittle. It's just the attack is coming. People are coming after these attacks. Docker's up there. Docker was born in the cloud. So is GitHub. Why are they being hit? They should have better security, right? And Imperva, a security company, got hit, right? And these attacks are not going to stop. And Gartner's weighed in on this. By 2022, it's going to be the most frequent attack vector because that's where a lot of the data is flowing back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like you said, there's a lot of big names out there, and it doesn't speak to the company, but really just the scope and scale of the problem. Right?
Yeah.
It really is that next cybersecurity frontier that hopefully we have a chance to get ahead of.
We hope. So how does this impact CMS, right? CMS is a system of systems, right? Everybody has, all these business owners, they have their own systems that do the work they need to do, but they don't gather all the data themselves. They pull data from the mainframe, they pull data from other systems. So there's a ton of data that is going back and forth. We used to rely on the hard connections, right? Connect Direct was there. Like I said, SFTP is still around, right? MQ. Well, those don't scale to cloud. They just don't. Okay, we may have a VPN in the cloud, but you really want to start getting away from these older connections that are a little bit more harder to manage and just don't scale. You want to have more open architectures that are easy to both support, to build in modern technologies and modern development methods, but also can be scaled out to have multiple systems interconnect with each other and have easier control of security. But like I said, how do we connect now? APIs and SFTP. And if you look behind me, there is a massive mass of mess. This isn't the CMS map of systems. It should be. It could really be. I've seen that actual system map. And what that is this massive systems that all talk back and forth to each other. And it's very complex, and it will give you some nightmares at night. Because it's hard to believe just how much we interconnect to pull data from each system and push data to every system, right? But it's for the mission. How do we get that data to know what happens so that we can either pay or improve care for the Americans?
Yeah, and a lot of it is organic growth. It's not like you start at this point, it just kind of happens over time. Yeah,
and it's amazing. At CMMI, we were quite impressed that we were going to build a system, then we realized we already had the data in another system. So it was, luckily we did that before we spent money on a new system. We just attached an API and pulled the data.
Right.
And then let's overlay that, right? So there's this entire mess behind me. Put clouds behind it and put little boxes, say BDC or EDC. These connections are dense between systems, but they're also stretched so that you have, going across internet links or VPN links or other different types of links. You have to worry about the security and reduce that risk that is inherent. So one thing we need to think about is the insider threat. CMS security training is just that. They talk about the insider threat a lot. And I'm not worried about the malicious insider. Right now, I am worried about the person who is overworked, undertrained. Yeah. This is too much to do, and there's a deadline to make. So they'll just click a couple boxes. That's how a lot of the S3 buckets get open, because they click the wrong box, right? They just don't think about it.
Yeah. We have all this automation around DevSecOps, but oftentimes it doesn't take the burden off of the folks managing those processes.
Yeah. Configuration is code. Well, I put this configuration in, it just rolled out the 300 systems.
Right.
And it's the wrong configuration. Okay, then we need to worry about this, right? And so are we getting around to it? We may catch it beforehand or afterhand, but as far as this data going back and forth, we need to make sure it's right to begin with. And so there's processes in place for this. There's a lot of very complex processes, a lot of paperwork. And as everyone has been through all this before, we have all these checklists, but a lot of people end up not doing them because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of paperwork. A lot of people say, why am I doing this? In the end, it doesn't get me anything. And even though that's not quite true in reality, a lot of people just don't see the value in it. So they just stop doing the complex security work. And I love complex security work. And I love assigning complex security work to people. But I know through my time in operations that it doesn't fly. It ends up being thrown on the floor.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the same thing is kind of true with even end user controls like MFA, where if it's too cumbersome, users will find a way around it.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. So I wanted to use the Guy Fawkes mask. It's Halloween. I mean, what security person doesn't like to wear a hoodie and have a Guy Fawkes mask, really? So, but the point you get in your training, it holds true. This is the outsider threat. This is CMS. There is a ton of data here that bad people want, whether it's a foreign nation that wants to maybe break in and make it look bad right before the election. Maybe they don't like the person that's running for re-election. Well, let's make them look bad, right? Or maybe they want to harvest data for a future attack, right? OPM. I've had all my information stolen.
Yep, mine multiple times over.
So and I got 3 years of credit monitoring, and as long as I promise not to sue, right? But you got to think about that, right? They're going to keep coming after you. And it's not just the nation state. It's the lone wolf, or it's the hacking group that either wants to pull the data to make money, or they want to get a name for themselves.
Right.
Let's just watch the world burn. I hate to say it, but those people are out there. All right? And, they use sophisticated methods. Nation states have tons of money and time. They will do anything they can. They'll research your API or what the technique and the methods you use to get there, and maybe reverse engineer it or figure out methods or ways that we aren't aware of yet to break into it, right?
Right. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's not just resources aren't just money. They also have time. Sometimes they can be on systems for quite a long time before they actually choose to act.
Yeah.
Right?
And everyone says, oh, my keys are secure. Well, maybe not. Maybe they don't need to break into your system to get the keys because there are other places.
Exactly. Yep.
So, I mean, what comes down is to reducing the risk, right? We have reputational damage to public institutions. We do not want that. We do not want to hurt grandma, right? Don't do it. We don't want to have the American people lose faith in our government, right? Or their ability to perpetuate the mission of CMS. There's more regulations, right? For those of you who interconnect with other, our companies, our sponsors, our supporters of CMS, the contractors, maybe you need to worry about this. There's GDPR out there, right? There's the California privacy rules. You need to worry about this kind of thing. So it's not just the CMS and the Fed regulations, right? Or maybe possible upcoming federal privacy regulations, which we've been hoping for since I had hair. And one day. But,
Sorry. I'm like, you still have hair.
Just don't look. Since you're good hair.
I feel like you need to bend over when
That's
you
right.
say it.
All right. So you need to remember, we're here to reduce risk, right? You never completely eliminate risk. All right. We need to worry about reducing the risk of a data breach, protect grandma. We got to make sure grandma and grandpa are protected, right? The Medicaid people, if their data's in there, these are people that, okay, grandma is 60. Well, if you steal healthcare and, SSN and other information from a Medicaid person that's a kid, they've got 60, 70, 80 years ahead of them that they need to think about that, right? Then we have the loss in faith of CMS. We do not want to do that. We want to make sure that the American public doesn't lose faith that CMS can perform its mission for them and reduce the risk for them so that they don't have to worry about this kind of thing. It's just done for them. They don't need to worry about it. Your government's at work. But the thing is, like I said before, all this data, all this information is going back and forth and back and forth, and it's huge amounts. I mean, millions of records on millions of people every day, every second of every day. And it's going through new methods between different data centers, different clouds. It's a concern.
Yeah, and rightfully so, it's hard to track all of it.
Yeah. I mean, how do you know who's really sending you that data? How do you know who's pulling the data?
Right.
I have a key. We'll talk about that. And finally, compliance, right? Everyone loves. I love compliance. I love giving everybody tons of paper with every checkbox. Meet the checkbox, you're good, right? It's what we live for. As security people, it makes us feel good. We're going to pass the audit. We're going to pass the assessment. We're good. Well, let's think about compliance for a second. The ARS, out of the 853, there is a control called IAO3. It's about basically system-to-system communication. How do you know that that system is who they say they are, right? And the dirty secret is a lot of times at SCAs or before then, they would say, okay, how do you do that? Well, when we VPN in, we have a certificate. Well, the control is not just about that. Control is about how the various components of the system are talking back and forth. How do they, that that's who they really say they are? We tried PKI. That was spectacular in its crash. I remember all the Gartner talks I went to. I remember Forrester talking about it. I remember all the companies that had all the PKI management.
Right.
Put this in place, security's done forever. We're good. Well, obviously that has gone nowhere because everyone who tried to implement it ripped it out within months.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nightmare to just manage all those keys, certificates, rotation. I mean, it's one thing to put encryption in place. Good hygiene is totally a different beast.
Yeah, and they just dropped it. It just never worked. And what's, CMS is moving to an ACT, the capabilities model for assessment. So you need to think about these controls, not just, I have this in one place, but also with the outside threat, with the inside threat, right? How does this control protect you in multiple scenarios, just to make sure that you have your bases covered in multiple threat vectors. Just don't think the control of one way. Think of it in multiple methods and multiple vectors. And I'm actually going to pass it off to you because you've been doing this for quite some time and knew a lot more than I do about this. So.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So, you bring up a lot of great points, right? I think the essence of it is there really is this explosion in system-to-system connections, particularly in APIs. And so, any kind of strategy that an enterprise like CMS is putting together around digital protection needs to include a strong API security strategy, right? Because this really is, these APIs, these interconnects, these junctures really are the channel through which large pipes of data flows. Right. It's not about that endpoint laptop connecting into the one web app. It's about everything that's happening after that point. And so, when we talk about security by design and not obscurity, step one is really to gain visibility into the overall API exposure that an enterprise is opening itself up to, right? And this ends up being a collaborative effort between your development team, your security folks, and your QA folks, right? And so oftentimes what ends up happening is there's this tight-knit development team that's under the gun to churn out new features, churn out new capabilities, and they're exposing APIs and kind of opening that aperture of the enterprise without necessarily having the time or the breadth to understand what the repercussions of that are, right? And so what really needs to happen from a visibility perspective is peeling apart those development teams and starting that security discussion around API exposure, right? Bringing in the security folks, bringing in the QA folks who may actually have really creative ideas about how to test the implications of this exposure, how to test like things are running across multiple environments, multiple clouds. And so step one is really that visibility and acknowledging the existence of what you're trying to protect.
Right? That make it everyone's job.
Yeah, absolutely. And bring everyone into the fold, right? And then step 2 is once we know, right? We looked at that map up there of the all of those interconnects and
Yes.
systems and things like that. Once we unravel that a bit, right? We actually have something that we can work with, something we can weave. The next piece is control. So securing beyond obfuscation means building into the design control. And when I say control, what is that really? That's authentication and access control.
Know that system and know who's hitting you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you bring up a great point where logging and monitoring are an essential part of that story.
Yeah.
So we may put in controls around, okay, I am only going to allow these trusted machines to communicate back in with me. But then I need to have the logging and monitoring in place on top of that to make sure that those access controls and those authentication controls are actually being exercised and behaving the way I expect.
But even then, that can be hard too, right? So I could do a
It is.
whitelist. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a control, but I mean, people managing the whitelist becomes very painful, especially in a dynamic cloud environment.
Oh, it's
You're-
untenable.
You're spinning systems up and down all the time.
Yeah. I mean, even I'll tell you, as a running a small startup of just a handful of folks, and some core applications, whitelists just don't work. Right? When you start moving towards cloud, start embracing that open architecture, containers, orchestration, you have to leave those old notions of whitelisting and MAC addresses and all of that behind
Yeah.
because
They change constantly.
change, right? Yeah. But that said, there are a lot of tools out there to help with API protection. A good starting point is an API management platform,
Yeah.
right? So, traditionally, a lot of them were focused on, east-west external customer partner-facing APIs. But really now they're expanding towards internal APIs because there is this general understanding of what we've mentioned where there is no perimeter with an enterprise, right?
Yep.
It's all been pushed out.
And every COTS software has an API. And how do you manage that?
Absolutely.
They love to say that, and then you have to put it in place.
Absolutely. And so, a few good household names for API management platforms are MuleSoft, Apigee, 3Scale, and if I remember correctly, I believe parts of CMS is already using or considering using MuleSoft. It's a great start. Okay, so design is great. It's a solid start and necessary, but really where we're seeing attacks successful is, let's be honest, it's not at the nation state breaking a crypto protocol level, right?
Yeah.
It is in adversaries coming in, stealing credentials, capitalizing on poor OPSEC practices. And so, they're doing things like swiping credentials from poor configuration, stale or forgotten test environments, really common threat scenario that actually some of these version control companies are trying to do something about. Like GitHub is routinely, developers will inadvertently check in an API key or an API token into configuration in the repository. Go to bed, wake up the next morning and realize they've got a $100,000 AWS bill from someone taking over, their account and using it for mining.
Yeah, it's not just that. I mean, these keys are stored everywhere.
They are.
They're not breaking into your system usually to take these, right? Because there's better practices now. They're not putting them into code. They're putting it into, the key share, the different secret keepers and things like that. But these things, they're in Git, they're in email, they're in SharePoint.
Yeah.
They're on someone's desk.
CI/CD systems, they're ripe targets because they end up being that bridge between dev and deployment.
Yeah.
Right.
Attack your weakest point.
Right. So, for example, I think you showed up a slide of all of these recent breaches. Right?
Yep.
MGM was that prime example where what ended up happening was they embedded inadvertently an API key into their product documentation. And the result was 142 million records leaked of guests, right? And so these are not theoretical risks. These are things that are actually happening and at an alarming rate. So, I think what's really important is to, as an enterprise, audit, and as much as possible, build automation into that audit process, because cybersecurity is not a point-in-time activity.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
Continuous.
not an every so often concern. It's continuous, as you said, continuous vigilance, continuous kind of automated security whenever possible.
I mean, it used to be every 3 years or every year, my ATO or my ACT. That was when people concerned. And
Yeah.
CMS has done great strides in the past 20 years to flip that to, we need to think about this all the time.
Yeah.
But you need to just keep building on your foundation blocks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know we've talked about cloud a lot today. I think an important point here is like cloud configuration, for example. Mm-hmm. When you decide to kind of embark on that cloud transformation journey, it's really important to understand that it is a shared security model. These platforms provide a lot, but there's also a lot of onus on the user of that platform to make sure that they enable the right controls. It's really important to understand what falls on the platform provider and what actually is our responsibility from a security perspective.
Too many times doing ACTs, they say, well, AWS takes care of that. I'm like, no, that is a hybrid control. And,
Right.
and AWS specifically tells you in that spreadsheet they give to you, this is what we do, this is what you do.
Right.
And Microsoft does the same with Azure, and I believe Salesforce does the same. You need to study that and make sure you have that taken care of.
Absolutely. Right. And so, traditionally today, API security, API authentication happens through secrets. These are generally keys, tokens, sometimes still PKI and SSL type client certificates. Essentially, these are long-lived static secrets, right? And it's really important to treat them as top secrets, right?
Yeah.
The reason for that is these traditional models of API authentication end up following what we call as the bearer model. And what that means is if you hold the secret and you present it, then that means you're legit, right? If I bear that token, if I bear that key, then I must be a legitimate kind of client to your API service.
Yeah.
Right? And we all know that's not true. It's really essentially just a strong machine password. And we all know what's happened over time with just usernames and passwords and how that in and of itself is not sufficient authentication.
Nope. It never does work.
Yeah. And so, when we talk about these traditional kind of API secrets, it's really important to make sure that mantra of protection is built into DevSecOps pipelines, not just at the client side when it finally gets to its destination, but upon creation, transmission, and all the way through to storage on the client side, right? These really end up being kind of the weakest links in your system-to-system security story.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned this, Adam, where there are still a lot of system-to-system connections that are based off of older protocols, older ways, things like SFTP, SSH, even some just pure HTTPS, right, or HTTP.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to embrace APIs instead of these older protocols so that as an enterprise, you can move towards an API-first strategy, right?
Yeah.
It allows for uniform security story, uniform kind of coverage and visibility, and hopefully, then you can kind of take the next step to doing things like moving away from static credentials.
One could hope.
Yeah, and so, if you have these long-lived credentials like static API keys, obviously good hygiene. Rotate them often, protect them as secrets, as we've talked about, and use strong authentication protocols like OAuth or OpenID Connect, JWT as good primary factors, right? I will say this particularly, and I say this with some empathy for DevSecOps teams, that it's actually pretty hard to do, but don't reuse secrets across systems, right? Especially in things like cloud deployments where you may be deploying 300 or 1,000 of the same Docker container out to cloud. It's really tempting to reuse that API key across all of them because it's easier ops. That ends up being kind of really the weak link, right? Especially because they are out there in the wild, because it's beyond a traditional network perimeter.
It's a skeleton key, but also it's harder to change in all the systems at once.
Yes.
So as soon as you're hit everywhere, and you don't know where you're hit.
Yeah, and not knowing where you're hit, that's a great point in terms of if you don't uniquely kind of identify and seed each of these incoming connection points, how do you differentiate between any of them?
Yeah.
Right.
Who's who?
Yeah.
So.
And so, certainly we've kind of touched on this a little bit here and there, but app secrets are pretty much analogous to usernames and passwords. What would be great is if we could leverage from a lot of the lessons and kind of pain points we've learned on the human authentication side, right? So, we started off talking about that human desktop or device or, mobile phone to the server.
Yeah.
In that juncture, I think we've all established that static credentials are not good enough, and we have things like MFA, we have biometrics, we have, authenticator apps, all of that type of stuff.
Yeah.
We need that same type of protection on the system-to-system side, those junctures beyond, the APIs. And so, there's some interesting efforts like the ones that we're working on at Corsha to really bring that idea of advanced API authentication, dynamic, fresh credentials to system connections, right? So anytime you can have a naturally short-lived or even better dynamic one-time use credential, that's a much stronger security story and an easier story for your DevOps teams to manage.
Yeah, very much easier. So, I said, we were talking about it earlier, Amazon. I have MFA for Amazon.
Right.
Why do I have it? Because my kids are at home. And they may have gotten the password, I'll say, off of mom, because obviously I have strong security on my passwords. And I will see that my son's trying to buy a movie or trying to buy something. Here's your one-time password code.
Everyone's
Why
got
am I
their
getting
adversaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Right. But you obviously take that trouble with your Amazon account. We need to apply that same vigilance to those system-to-system kind of larger pipe connections.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot more data.
Yeah.
So, I can return, some Pokemon, but, I can't return 100,000 records of grandma and grandpa.
Yeah.
So once they're out, they're out. So that's the problem. So, I'm glad you're here. You guys have been researching this for years to know what these issues are, right? That's why, when I first heard about this and, I thought, oh, okay, that is an issue. And it actually caused some issues and worries and long nights for me. So, just can you talk about how you had to learn to approach this issue in, the different realms of cloud and even inter-system APIs?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually came across the issue by experiencing it ourselves. So, we're a cybersecurity startup that opened shop about early 2018. Mm-hmm. And as a young dev shop, I wanted to embrace cloud, be cloud native, embrace automation, and quite frankly, it's cheaper. Right?
Yeah. It's no small company has a data center anymore.
Exactly. And as I was coming out of the government world myself, I had always veered away from cloud and always kind of been a little leery of it. And so starting this effort, starting this company myself, I realized that there were all of these gaps in terms of these machine-to-machine connections, in terms of authentication of APIs, and yet this is really kind of the digital thread that's tying everything together. So, any SaaS provider you're using, any kind of even system you're deploying yourself out to cloud, chances are it's not a monolith anymore. It's a collection of services that all have to communicate back and forth, right? And so this came out of a pain point that we had, where we said, all right, this JWT does not allow me to sleep at night. I need a little bit more. And so we came up with MFA for APIs, which is essentially a way to layer on top, just like we do on the human side, an additional authenticator onto those system-to-system junctures. And I will say, one of the things that was really important to me, because we wanted to be able to help out not just public sector companies, but also private sector and commercial, is I feel like any security solution that CMS may be considering, that any enterprise may be considering, that has one foot in yesterday and one foot in tomorrow, needs to work with both of those paradigms, right?
Yes.
So it's got to be both cloud native and modern, but then still support those legacy applications until they're ready to cross over.
Yeah. They've only been around for 30 years. So.
Everyone has their day.
It takes a long time.
That's right. And so, at a really high level, the way that Corsha works is we create this out-of-band way for API clients to be able to create kind of an authentication stream that then they can leverage when it's time to make their API calls.
Oh, okay.
Right? And the way that it happens, the way that magic happens, is we actually use something called a distributed ledger network, so AKA blockchain.
Yeah.
But it's a private, permissioned, kind of scalable, really closed blockchain network that's collecting what we'll say are these dynamic authentication streams from each of these API clients, wherever they may be. I mean, it could be a Docker container, it could be a VM, it could be a traditional 1U in your data center, but if it needs to talk to API services, then you deploy an authenticator out with it, starts the stream off, and then when it's time to make the API call, it sends this dynamic credential based off of the current window of that stream.
Okay.
So, what's neat about it is it layers on top of primary authentication factors. So you don't need to get rid of the OAuth or the OpenID or the JWT. You just get this added layer of protection.
And so even if you have the key, you still can't make the connection.
Exactly. It's the same analogy of, even if your password ends up on the dark web, if you've been savvy enough to turn MFA on for your bank account, there's not much you can do with that static password, right? And so, the premise, and this is what we've talked about, is understand your exposure, is to give that central view of all of your incoming API connections and clients and facilitate the system that's both modern and cloud native. It's actually built on Kubernetes itself.
Oh, okay.
But also supports legacy applications, right? So it doesn't require kind of that Band-Aid rip and replace.
Well, I do thank you for your time today. I mean, it does definitely explain a lot of things, a lot of worries I had and again, a lot of times you don't realize the fear until, we first met. Actually, it was kind of a eye-opening experience. I'm like, oh, brother, I need to worry about this. And remember, we need to worry about data, right? We need to think about data as flowing everywhere, into data centers, into clouds, out of clouds, into hospitals, into our development and our processing, the max. It's flowing everywhere. How do we protect that data? It's not just to know that the person has the right key, right? We need to know who they are.
Right.
That second factor really is helpful, and not just for stealing the data. I just stole all the grandma's information. That's bad. Santa's not coming to see me this year. What about that connection that's going to come into CMS, where that doctor paid someone to come in? I have the key. I stole the key. I'm going to create a fake doctor, and I did $30,000 worth of doctor visits this month.
Yeah.
We'll pay the bill. You taking it from a trusted source. If you're already inside, if someone's compromised the system inside, remember CMS has the wall. CMS is inside the perimeter. But just like Target, if someone hits one system over here, maybe they can get to you.
It piggybacks, yeah.
Yep. So you might already be inside they're inside the house, right? This is October, they're inside the house.
And it's a great point. It's not just about theft of information. It can also be introducing misinformation, which is just as, if not more so, dangerous.
Yeah. And you have to worry about those inside threats. The person who's too tired or not trained or doesn't realize what they're doing. I click the box, my S3 bucket's on the internet. That's bad. That's that's usually a phone call from a security company that says, for $20,000 we'll protect you, right? That's bad. Outside threats, again, the state actors, the rogues, the hacking groups, they either want money, the data, or fame. And I said, if your key is in email, is in SharePoint, is in Git, is in somewhere, they don't have to break your system. And and like you said, I don't need to break the SSL, because I say I am who you think I am. So I'm going to encrypt that session. Mm-hmm. And how do you know that that's who it is, right? So you have that second factor. And by doing that, I tried the key. I don't have that second factor. I failed. Well, guess what? That is an automated response. That's a log send to the SOC. That could be a very loud log sent to the SOC that someone has my key is failing, and someone's trying to get data out or push bad data in. So there is continuous monitoring right there. Again, we do thank you for your time. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I really enjoyed our first meeting and still talking about this. You gave me something to stay awake at night about, but I do enjoy seeing the different methods and different ways to help protect this kind of data. Once again, we will be at our virtual booth following this talk, so please come out and see us, and we'll talk to you all later.